Elon Musk had faced many challenges in his career, but being stranded at a small airport outside Houston wasn't one he had expected. His private jet had developed engine trouble, and with no immediate repair team available, he had no choice but to call for an Uber. Used to traveling in luxury, he wasn't thrilled about the situation, but he prided himself on adaptability. His assistant had booked him a room at the Four Seasons downtown, and within minutes, a white Toyota Camry pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a Tesla or a chauffeured limousine, but it would do for now. Sliding into the back seat, Elon immediately noticed that the car was immaculately clean and had a faint scent of pine. "Four Seasons, downtown?" the driver asked politely. Elon nodded, barely looking up from his phone. He had dozens of emails to catch up on. However, something unusual caught his eye: the open notepad on the dashboard, filled with handwritten numbers and complex equations. Most Uber drivers jotted down addresses or reminders, but these weren't just scribbles. Elon recognized advanced mathematical formulas, the kind used in orbital mechanics and propulsion physics. Curious, he glanced at the driver, a man in his 70s, with neatly combed white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. When the driver noticed Elon's gaze, he quickly shut the notepad and tucked it into his pocket. "Just an old habit," the man said with a modest smile. Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "I'm something of a math guy myself." The driver hesitated before responding. "I know who you are, Mr. Musk. My name is Tetsuo Nakamura." What had begun as a routine Uber ride was about to change both of their lives, and perhaps the future of space travel itself. As the rain drizzled against the car windows, Elon Musk found himself captivated by the man sitting in the driver's seat. Tetsuo Nakamura wasn't just any Uber driver, there was something about him that felt out of place. His calm demeanor, the way he spoke with precision, and most of all, the complex equations on his notepad suggested he was no ordinary man. "You seem to know your way around advanced math," Elon probed. "Orbital mechanics, propulsion efficiency, those aren't exactly casual doodles." Tetsuo's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. For a moment, he hesitated, as if debating how much to share. Then, with a quiet sigh, he replied, "I worked at NASA for over 30 years. I was an engineer on the Space Shuttle program." Elon sat up straighter. "NASA?" Tetsuo nodded, his voice tinged with both pride and regret. "I specialized in propulsion systems. Designed fuel injection models that increased shuttle efficiency by nearly 20%, worked on safety redundancies that never failed. But when the shuttle program ended in 2011, they downsized. I was offered early retirement. Too old for the private sector, too overqualified for entry-level positions. So, I started teaching high school math. And when that didn't pay the bills, I began driving for Uber." Elon was stunned. A NASA engineer, forced into early retirement, driving strangers around Houston. The thought irritated him: how many brilliant minds had been lost to bureaucracy and budget cuts? "And the equations in your notepad?" Elon pressed. Tetsuo smiled faintly. "I never stopped thinking about propulsion. The designs in that notebook. They're part of a system I've been developing. A new approach to interplanetary travel." A silence fell over the car. Elon could feel the weight of those words. This wasn't just an old man clinging to past glories, this was someone who had spent decades thinking about how to push humanity forward, only to be discarded by the very institutions that once valued his genius. "So why haven't you shared this?" Elon asked. Tetsuo sighed. "No one listens to an old man with crazy ideas. Not anymore." Elon's mind was already racing. Maybe others wouldn't listen, but he would. Elon Musk had built his career on recognizing potential where others saw limitations. He didn't care about credentials or how things had been done before, he cared about results. And here, sitting in the front seat of a modest Uber, was a man whose mind held the key to something extraordinary. The moment they reached the Four Seasons, Elon didn't hesitate. Before stepping out, he turned to Tetsuo Nakamura. "I want to see those designs." Tetsuo looked startled. "You mean, my equations?" Elon nodded. "All of it. Not just what's in your notepad. If what you're working on is as advanced as I think it is, it shouldn't be sitting in the front seat of an Uber, it should be in a lab." Tetsuo hesitated. Years of rejection had taught him not to hope too quickly. "Mr. Musk, I appreciate your interest, but people have dismissed my ideas before. NASA. Private aerospace firms. Everyone." Elon leaned in, his voice firm. "I'm not everyone." Something in his tone made Tetsuo pause. The Elon Musk sitting in front of him wasn't just a billionaire looking for a vanity project, he was a man on a mission. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one person crazy enough to believe in something that no one else would. Finally, Tetsuo exhaled. "All right. Come by my house tomorrow. I'll show you what I've been working on." Elon smiled. "Text me your address." He pulled a $100 bill from his wallet and handed it to Tetsuo. "For the ride. And for your time." That night, as Tetsuo pulled into the driveway of his modest Houston home, his wife, Emiko, was waiting up for him. Even after years of battling cancer, her eyes still sparkled with warmth. "You're late," she said teasingly. "Busy night?" Tetsuo chuckled as he hung up his jacket. "You won't believe who was in my car tonight." He told her about Elon Musk, the equations, the unexpected interest in his work. As he spoke, Emiko's face softened. "Did you show him everything?" Tetsuo shook his head. "Not yet. But he wants to see more." Emiko reached out and squeezed his hand. "Then show him. You've spent too many years hiding your brilliance. Maybe this is your second chance." The next morning, a sleek Tesla pulled up in front of Tetsuo's house. Elon stepped out, dressed casually but moving with his characteristic energy. As he walked up the driveway, he noticed the carefully tended flower beds, the small wind chime swaying in the breeze. This was a humble home, one built on years of quiet sacrifice. Tetsuo greeted him at the door, looking both nervous and excited. "Come in." They walked through the house, past framed family photos and bookshelves lined with old engineering texts, until they reached the garage. Tetsuo flipped on the light, revealing a workshop packed with blueprints, equations scrawled on whiteboards, and a crude prototype sitting in the center. Elon's eyes widened. This isn't just theory, is it?" Tetsuo smiled. "No. It's real. And if you're willing to take a risk, we can build it." Elon extended his hand. "Let's get to work." Elon Musk had always prided himself on being able to recognize groundbreaking ideas before the rest of the world caught on. But standing in Tetsuo Nakamura's garage, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and prototype components cobbled together from spare parts, he realized that he had stumbled onto something truly revolutionary. "This isn't just a theory," Elon said, running his fingers over a stack of carefully organized notes. "This is a complete propulsion system." Tetsuo nodded. "I've spent the last 15 years refining it. It's a new approach to interplanetary propulsion, something beyond chemical rockets. This could make long-distance space travel practical, even routine." Elon leaned in, studying the core of Tetsuo's concept. At its heart was an innovative use of space-time manipulation, allowing a spacecraft to compress the distance between 2 points rather than simply accelerating through it. If the math was correct, this technology could reduce travel time to Mars from months to mere weeks, and even more astonishingly, could make trips to the outer planets feasible within a human lifetime. "Why hasn't anyone built this before?" Elon asked. Tetsuo gave a dry chuckle. "Because people are afraid of ideas that sound impossible. When NASA shut down the shuttle program, I tried pitching this concept to private aerospace firms. They told me I was too old, too theoretical. Eventually, I stopped trying. Elon's jaw tightened. Well, they were wrong. Without hesitation, Elon made his offer. I want you to join SpaceX as a special consultant. We'll fund your research, give you a full lab, bring in top engineers to work with you. And I promise you this, if your design works, we'll build it. Tetsuo hesitated. His entire career had been a series of near misses, of bureaucratic rejections and missed opportunities. He glanced at the framed photo of his wife, Imiko, on his workbench. She had always believed in him, even when no one else did. And now, here was Elon Musk, the man who had built reusable rockets when the world said it couldn't be done, offering him the chance of a lifetime. There's one condition, Tetsuo said finally. My granddaughter, Aiko, works with me. She's an aerospace engineering student, and she understands my work better than anyone. Elon nodded without hesitation. Done. We always need great engineers. The next day, SpaceX sent a team to Tetsuo's home to transform his garage into a state-of-the-art laboratory. Workbenches were installed, computers with advanced modeling software were set up, and a dedicated fabrication unit was brought in for prototyping. Aiko was ecstatic. This is incredible, Grandpa. Your ideas are finally getting the chance they deserve. But even as excitement built, Tetsuo remained cautious. He had spent years being dismissed as a relic of the past. Now, he was being given the resources to prove that his theories could change the future. One evening, as the lab hummed with the energy of engineers working late into the night, Elon visited again. He found Tetsuo staring at a whiteboard deep in thought. You look worried, Elon said. Tetsuo smiled faintly. Not worried, focused. We're about to change everything. And deep down, for the first time in years, he truly believed it. For weeks, Tetsuo Nakamura's home had become an unlikely center for some of the most advanced space research in the world. Engineers from SpaceX worked alongside him and his granddaughter, Aiko, transforming his once cluttered garage into a fully operational lab. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in complex equations. 3D printers whirred, producing prototype components. The smell of coffee and solder filled the air as the team worked late into the night, driven by the urgency of a dream long deferred. Elon Musk checked in frequently, either through video calls or in person. He didn't micromanage, but his presence was a constant reminder that this wasn't just an experiment, it was the future of space travel. The project had two main objectives. The first was the Nakamura Drive, an innovative propulsion system that could dramatically shorten travel times between planets by altering the effective distance through space-time manipulation. The second, even more ambitious, was an experimental wormhole stabilization system, an idea so radical that even the most visionary engineers hesitated to believe it could work. Tetsuo focused on refining the propulsion system first. If we can make the Nakamura Drive work, he told Aiko, then the wormhole project won't seem so impossible. The first full-scale test was scheduled for a Saturday morning. SpaceX had provided a sealed test chamber where they could evaluate the drive in a controlled environment. The team worked through the night, making last-minute calibrations, checking for errors in the programming, and ensuring that safety protocols were in place. By 8 a.m., Elon had arrived. He stood at the back of the lab, arms crossed, watching as the final preparations were made. Is this going to work? He asked. Tetsuo didn't look up from his console. It should. Elon smirked. I like it will better. With everything ready, Aiko initiated the test sequence. The drive powered up with a low hum. The energy readings climbed steadily, and a containment field formed around the core. Field stability at 90%, one of the engineers reported. Power levels holding. Tetsuo watched the monitors, his hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. The key to the Nakamura Drive was creating a localized distortion in spacetime, allowing an object to effectively skip forward without needing traditional thrust. If it worked, this would be the first real proof that his theories were correct. Activating phase shift, Aiko announced. On screen, the small test probe inside the chamber began to blur slightly, as if it existed in two places at once. Then, in an instant, it disappeared, only to reappear several inches away, perfectly intact. The room went silent. Confirming telemetry, one of the engineers murmured, typing furiously. A few seconds later, he looked up, his face pale with disbelief. It worked. The probe moved instantaneously. Elon grinned. History just happened in this garage. The room erupted in cheers, but Tetsuo simply let out a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. Decades of rejection, years of struggling to be heard, and now, proof. His propulsion system wasn't just theory anymore. It was reality. As the excitement died down, Elon turned to him. How soon can we scale this up? Tetsuo straightened. Give us a month. We can test it on a full spacecraft. But before they could move forward, there was another, quieter conversation to be had. That night, as the celebration wound down, Aiko sat with her grandfather in the garage, watching him sketch out refinements to the design. You weren't surprised when it worked, she said. Tetsuo chuckled. I've been running these calculations in my head for years. I knew the physics were right. But proving it? That's different. Aiko hesitated. Do you think the wormhole project will work, too? Tetsuo looked at her, then at the equations on the whiteboard. The propulsion system had been a stepping stone, a way to push humanity forward. But the wormhole? That was something else entirely. If we can master space-time propulsion, he said slowly, then bending space itself isn't far behind. For now, the Nakamura drive was the focus. But in the back of his mind, Tetsuo knew that what had just happened in his garage was only the beginning. For weeks, the Nakamura drive was all anyone at SpaceX could talk about. The breakthrough test in Tetsuo Nakamura's garage had proven that space-time propulsion was no longer just a concept, it was a reality. The technology could revolutionize space travel, slashing the time it took to reach Mars from months to mere weeks. Engineers and physicists worked around the clock, refining the drive, running simulations, and preparing for a larger-scale test on an actual spacecraft. But for Tetsuo, the celebration was bittersweet. His wife, Emiko Nakamura, had been battling cancer for years, and her condition was worsening. While Tetsuo poured his energy into his research, Emiko had always been his anchor, the one person who had believed in him when the rest of the world dismissed him as an aging scientist with impossible dreams. One evening, after a long day at the lab, Tetsuo returned home to find Aiko sitting by Emiko's bedside, her expression tight with worry. Emiko looked frilier than ever, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. She's been asking for you, Aiko said softly. Tetsuo sat beside his wife, taking her hand in his. I'm here, Emiko. She smiled weakly. Tell me, how's the project? He hesitated, knowing she was too weak to hear the full story. But he also knew she would want the truth. It works, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The drive, it actually works. A tear slipped from the corner of Emiko's eye. I always knew you would do it. Tetsuo swallowed hard. You should have been there. You should have seen it. I didn't need to, she whispered. I believed in you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the medical equipment hummed softly in the background. Then, with a quiet but urgent voice, Emiko said, Promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens to me, finish it. See it through. Tetsuo felt his chest tighten. Emiko. She squeezed his hand, surprising him with her strength. Promise me. Tetsuo's throat felt raw. He wanted to tell her that they would find a way, that there was still time, but he had spent his life chasing the impossible. He knew when something was inevitable. "I promise," he whispered. A few nights later, Emiko passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was quiet, attended by close family, friends, and a handful of SpaceX engineers who had grown close to Tetsuo in the past months. Elon Musk came, standing in the back, offering his support in the way he knew best, by ensuring that Tetsuo had the time and space to grieve without pressure. But grief is a strange thing. For days, Tetsuo wandered through his home, feeling lost. The garage-turned-laboratory, once a place of excitement and discovery, now felt hollow. The equations on the whiteboards were still there, the project still waiting, but his motivation had faded. What was the point of reaching for the stars if the one person who had believed in him the most wasn't there to see it? Aiko stayed close, watching him carefully. One evening, as they sat together, she handed him an envelope with his name written on it in Emiko's delicate handwriting. "She wrote this for you," Aiko said. Tetsuo hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Tetsuo. If you're reading this, I am already gone. But don't be sad for too long. We had a beautiful life together, filled with love, laughter, and dreams bigger than both of us. You once told me that space travel was about conquering the darkness between the stars. But right now, my love, you are lost in your own darkness. You must find your way through it. Not for me, but for the dream we shared. You promised me you would finish this. So do it. And when you look up at the stars, know that I am there, watching, proud of you. Always. Emiko." Tetsuo felt the letter tremble in his hands. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The next morning, before dawn, he returned to the lab. When Elon arrived later that day, he found Tetsuo standing at the whiteboard, equations flowing effortlessly from his mind onto the surface. The grief was still there, but so was the fire. "You're back," Elon said simply. Tetsuo nodded. "There's work to do." Over the next few weeks, the Nakamura drive was prepped for its first large-scale test on a spacecraft. If successful, it would mark the first time in human history that space-time propulsion was used outside of a lab. At the same time, the wormhole research continued. The team had managed to stabilize a microscopic wormhole for a few seconds, an achievement previously thought impossible. Now, the next step was clear: scaling it up. One evening, as Tetsuo reviewed the latest wormhole data, Aiko sat beside him. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked. He looked at her, the weight of decades of research and lost time in his eyes. "I don't just think it's possible," he said. "I think we're closer than anyone realizes." Outside, the Texas sky was filled with stars, some distant, some close. But for the first time, Tetsuo Nakamura felt certain that they were no longer out of reach. The morning of the first full-scale Nakamura Drive test was unlike anything SpaceX had ever attempted before. The modified Dragon spacecraft, equipped with the revolutionary propulsion system, sat on its launch platform at the company's Texas facility. Unlike a traditional rocket launch, there was no towering stack of fuel tanks, no massive engines ready to roar to life. Instead, the capsule was eerily still, waiting for a different kind of power, one that would bend space-time itself. Inside the control room, engineers monitored every system, their eyes glued to screens displaying real-time data. Elon Musk stood at the front, arms crossed, exuding calm confidence, but even he knew that today was a gamble. If this worked, space travel would never be the same again. If it failed, the Nakamura Drive might remain an interesting theory, but nothing more. Tetsuo Nakamura sat at his own console, silent but focused. His granddaughter, Aiko Nakamura, was beside him, running last-minute checks on the system's energy output. For both of them, this wasn't just a test, it was the culmination of a lifetime of work, of sacrifice, of dreams once thought impossible. "All systems nominal," Aiko reported. "Drive is at standby, power stable." Elon turned to Tetsuo. "You want to do the honors?" Tetsuo hesitated for only a second before nodding. He reached for the console and, with a steady hand, initiated the activation sequence. A low hum filled the control room as the drive powered up. The energy readings climbed steadily, and inside the containment chamber, the space around the Dragon capsule began to distort. The visual effect was mesmerizing, its edges blurred, as though reality itself were stretching. "Field stability at 95%, one of the engineers called out. "Distortion at 40% and rising," another added. The capsule had one simple task: instead of launching upward through the atmosphere, it would jump instantaneously from its current location to a predetermined point 300 kilometers above Earth, straight into orbit. It was a small test, relatively speaking, but if successful, it would mean that spacecraft could reach space without the need for massive rockets, cutting launch costs to a fraction of what they were today. "Elon, we're ready," Aiko said. Elon took a breath. "All right. Initiate jump sequence in 3, 2, 1, go." In an instant, the Dragon capsule seemed to stretch impossibly thin, then, without a sound, it vanished. For a moment, the room was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The second stretched, heavy with uncertainty. Then, a voice crackled over the speakers from Mission Control. "We have telemetry confirmation. The Dragon capsule has successfully arrived in orbit. Position is precise within 1 meter of target coordinates." The control room erupted. Cheers, shouts, engineers clapping each other on the back. Years of work, of calculations, of late nights in a garage, had just resulted in one of the greatest achievements in space exploration history. Elon turned to Tetsuo, grinning. "You just changed the world." Tetsuo, overwhelmed, simply exhaled. He looked at Aiko, who was laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it," she said, hugging him tightly. But as the celebrations continued, something else was happening elsewhere in the SpaceX facility. The wormhole experiment. While the Nakamura Drive test was a resounding success, another experiment had been running in parallel. Deep inside a secured lab, the team working on the wormhole project had been preparing their next breakthrough, stabilizing an aperture large enough to send an object through. For months, they had been able to create microscopic wormholes, keeping them stable for fractions of a second. But now, with new refinements and increased power, they were ready to attempt a 30-centimeter aperture, large enough for meaningful material transfer. Activating the wormhole generator, Dr. Sophia Chen, one of the lead physicists, announced. Energy surged into the system, and on the monitors, they watched as the shimmering distortion formed within the containment field. This time, it didn't collapse, it held. "Wormhole stability at 98%, Raj Patel, another lead scientist, reported. It was working. "Prepare for first transmission," Dr. Chen said. A robotic arm moved forward, holding a small cube made of a unique composite material, designed to withstand extreme quantum fluctuations. "Sending now." The cube entered the shimmering hole, and for a second, nothing happened. Then, on another monitor, positioned in a separate test chamber across the facility, the cube reappeared, intact and unchanged. A hush fell over the room. The team had expected complications, but there were none. The cube had been transported instantaneously. They had done it. They had created the first controlled, stable wormhole for material transport. Just as the cheers erupted in the lab, a message came through from the control room. Elon's voice, full of energy. "The Dragon is in orbit," he announced. "The Nakamura Drive works." Dr. Chen picked up the comms and replied, "And the wormhole works, too." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then Elon's voice, incredulous and excited. "Holy sh*T. The future begins." In one day, 2 historic breakthroughs had occurred. The Nakamura Drive had rewritten the rules of space travel, and the wormhole experiment had proven that the next step, instantaneous travel across vast distances, was within reach. That night, SpaceX engineers didn't go home. The facility buzzed with conversation, celebration, and endless possibilities. Tetsuo, however, didn't celebrate in the control room. Instead, he stepped outside, away from the noise, into the cool Texas night. He looked up at the sky, at the stars that had once felt impossibly far away. Aiko found him there, standing in quiet reflection. "Thinking about Grandma?" she asked softly. Tetsuo nodded. "She should have been here for this." Aiko smiled gently. "She is." They stood there for a moment, gazing at the vast universe that had just become a little closer. For Tetsuo, the work wasn't done. The Nakamura Drive was just the beginning. The wormhole technology, still in its infancy, held even greater potential. And, deep in his mind, he knew there was one final step, one last frontier no one had dared to cross. Time. But that was a question for another day. For now, they had reached the stars. After the success of the Nakamura Drive and the first controlled wormhole experiment, the next step was clear: could a stable wormhole be created between Earth and another planet? For decades, the greatest challenge in space exploration wasn't just the vast distances, it was time. A trip to Mars took 7 months using traditional propulsion methods. Even with the Nakamura Drive, it would still take weeks to reach the red planet. But with a functioning wormhole, the journey could take seconds. It was an idea so ambitious that even the most visionary scientists hesitated. But Elon Musk didn't. "We're not waiting decades for this," he told the team. "Let's make it happen now." NASA, watching closely, was eager to collaborate. They had been preparing to launch Perseverance 2, a new Mars rover, and now they wanted to equip it with a wormhole receiver. If the experiment succeeded, it would mark the first interplanetary wormhole in human history. Tetsuo Nakamura, now leading the wormhole research team, was both excited and cautious. He had spent his entire career being dismissed for ideas that were too ambitious. Now, he was being asked to make the impossible happen, on a deadline. "This isn't just a physics problem," he told his team. "It's an engineering challenge, a stability challenge, a safety challenge. If this fails, we could tear a hole in space itself." The team worked around the clock, refining the technology. The wormhole generator on Earth had to be precisely aligned with the receiver on Mars, or the connection would be unstable. They developed a quantum-locked targeting system, ensuring that the two ends would remain synchronized despite planetary motion. 3 days before launch, the wormhole receiver was completed, an unassuming, microwave-sized device that contained some of the most advanced physics ever developed. It was rushed to Cape Canaveral, installed on Perseverance 2, and prepped for launch. As the countdown to liftoff began, Tetsuo, Aiko, and the entire SpaceX wormhole team gathered to watch. T-10. 9. 8. Aiko squeezed her grandfather's hand. "Are we ready for this?" Tetsuo smiled slightly. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." The rocket ignited, rising into the sky, carrying with it not just another rover, but the possibility of instantaneous interplanetary travel. The 7-month wait. While Perseverance 2 made its way to Mars, the team back on Earth didn't slow down. They refined their wormhole generator, increasing its stability. By the time the rover touched down on the Martian surface, they had successfully expanded their test aperture to 30 centimeters, proving they could sustain a connection large enough for meaningful material transfer. Finally, after 7 months, the signal arrived: Perseverance 2 had landed safely. Tetsuo, Elon, Aiko, and the entire team gathered in the control room. The moment had arrived. Powering up the wormhole generator, Dr. Sophia Chen announced. The lab filled with the hum of energy as the containment field stabilized. On the monitors, they watched as the shimmering distortion appeared. Attempting connection with Mars receiver, Raj Patel added. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a stable connection formed. The first Earth-Mars wormhole had just been created. The team erupted into cheers. Years of work, of doubt, of impossible challenges, and now, a bridge had been built between two worlds. "Prepare for first transmission," Dr. Chen said. A robotic arm moved forward, carrying a small cube of Martian soil collected by the rover. "Sending now." The cube entered the wormhole, and reappeared on Earth seconds later. Silence fell over the room. The cube was scanned. Perfectly intact. No degradation. No time delay. It had worked. For the first time in human history, something had traveled between planets instantaneously. Tetsuo exhaled, gripping Aiko's shoulder. "We just changed the future." And deep in his heart, he knew, this was only the beginning. The story of Tetsuo Nakamura and the Wormhole Project is a testament to the power of persistence, vision, and the willingness to challenge conventional thinking. One of the biggest lessons is that great ideas can come from anywhere, even from a retired engineer driving an Uber. Genius is not limited by age, background, or status. What matters is the ability to think beyond the limits of what others believe is possible. Another key takeaway is that belief and support matter. Tetsuo's wife, Imiko, was his rock, always believing in him even when the world dismissed his ideas. Similarly, Aiko, his granddaughter, played a crucial role in pushing the research forward. Innovation is rarely a solo journey, it thrives on mentorship, collaboration, and the encouragement of those who believe in something greater. The story also highlights the importance of risk-taking. Elon Musk saw potential where others saw impossibility. True progress doesn't happen by waiting for the perfect moment, it happens by taking bold steps, even in the face of uncertainty. Ultimately, this story reminds us that the future belongs to those who refuse to let their dreams die. With courage, resilience, and the right people by your side, even the most impossible dreams can become reality.